Thank you for listening. This course was created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional podcasts, books, newsletters, and cool merchandise await. Let's get started. Red teaming in the context of generative AI is structured adversarial testing that simulates realistic attackers to probe weaknesses before those weaknesses are exploited in the wild. At its heart, red teaming is both a mindset and a method. It intentionally adopts an adversary's perspective to explore chains of failure that single-point tests miss. Define the adversary clearly: motivation, resources, and tolerance for stealth. And you transform nebulous worry into concrete test cases that exercise your system under plausible pressure. Red teams do more than break things. They map how and why things break, revealing hidden dependencies, brittle policies, and unanticipated combinations of small faults that cascade. For generative systems, which blur the boundary between data, models, and actions, red teaming surfaces not only model-level failures such as hallucination or bias, but also systems-level gaps like insecure connectors, inadequate validation, and poor incident playbooks. Think of red teaming as the repeated fire drill that makes the organization's response muscle memory, not an adversary's discovery log. Scoping a red team engagement is an act of trade-off and clarity. You must choose which vectors to test, which assets to protect, and how far simulated attackers may escalate. In generative AI, common scopes cover prompt-based attacks that try to evade safety, data poisoning trials that inject adversarial content into ingestion pipelines, model extraction attempts that aim to reconstruct behavior via queries, and system abuse scenarios where the model's outputs cause downstream harm. Each scope has distinct operational demands. The tooling for crafting adaptive prompts differs from the instrumentation needed to simulate poisoning at ingestion, and each yields different insights into resilience. Carefully scoped red teams allow you to measure what matters, whether your validators catch manipulated outputs, whether ingestion guards exclude poisoned documents, or whether monitoring detects slow, stealthy extraction campaigns. Be deliberate. Better to run focused, repeatable experiments than sprawling, unrepeatable chaos that produces anecdotes but not defensible metrics. Good objectives make red teaming actionable rather than theatrical. At a program level, your red team should identify real vulnerabilities, validate that defense layers operate as intended when stressed, prioritize risks by likely impact and exploitability, and produce concrete recommendations that blue teams can implement and verify. Translate these high-level aims into measurable criteria. Can an adversary cause a forbidden action within X queries? Can a poisoned document survive ingestion and later surface in a critical context? How long does it take detection systems to notice anomalous query patterns typical of extraction? These objective-driven questions convert creative adversary work into engineering deliverables, findings you can triage and assign. The most valuable red teams do not merely list failure modes. They help you choose which controls to harden first so that limited engineering effort yields the largest reduction in risk exposure. Assemble a red team whose composition reflects the multiplicity of the task. Security specialists bring attack craft, threat modeling experience, and an adversarial mindset. AI researchers contribute knowledge of model weaknesses, training dynamics, and evaluation metrics. Domain experts ensure that simulated attacks are realistic for the environment you serve. Medical misinformation looks different from financial fraud. Multidisciplinary collaboration produces richer threat scenarios. A red team that includes product managers and operators will more often find paths that exploit real-world workflows and business logic, rather than abstract model quirks. Rotate membership and include outsiders, periodically independent testers, or third-party firms to inject fresh creativity that internal teams may have lost after living with the system for months. Finally, invest in the team's tooling and psychological safety. Encourage experimentation within clear rules of engagement, and provide the testbed and rollback capabilities that allow aggressive testing without risk to production systems. Attack simulation methods for generative models should be varied and adaptive, combining curated adversarial prompts with fuzzing, multi-step chain attacks, and stress tests of context length and persistence. Curated prompts let you explore targeted behavioral bypasses phrasings that coax a model into revealing disallowed content, while fuzzing generates broad coverage of edge tokens, encodings, or weird input forms that reveal brittle preprocessing and tokenization assumptions. Chaining multi-step attacks probes how small, seemingly harmless intermediate outputs can combine over time into dangerous outcomes. For example, repeated micro-optimizations could guide a model to craft a weaponized prompt or to reconstruct sensitive content gradually. Stress testing context length examines whether very long or crafted retrieval contexts can force hallucination or overflow protections to fail. The most effective red teams automate iterative loops, craft inputs, observe model responses, refine strategies, and quantify how attack success scales with query budget, access level, or auxiliary knowledge. Environment setup is critical to ethical and useful red teaming. Create isolated test beds that mirror your realistic deployment same models, retrieval pipelines, connectors, and logging, but segregated from production so experiments cannot touch real users or live data. Use deployment mirrors with realistic telemetry so detection systems and blue teams see believable signals and can iterate on rules without false positives or missed detections. Maintain control over monitoring so red team activity is distinguishable in logs for learning while still appearing stealthy enough to test detectors' capabilities. In other words, blue teams should first encounter adversarial signals as they would in deployment, not through special alert flags. Finally, build rollback and recovery processes into every test plan. If a simulated chain causes unwanted side effects, you can restore a clean state quickly and extract lessons without cascading harm. A realistic, safe environment enables aggressive probing without regret. Rules of engagement make red teaming ethical, useful, and repeatable by setting clear boundaries on what testers may and may not do, which systems are in scope, and how collateral risk will be managed. You should define the adversary's allowed escalation paths, whether credential use, simulated fraud payments, or social engineering channels are permitted, and what data or customers must be absolutely excluded from testing. Ethical constraints matter. Never endanger real users, avoid exposing sensitive personal data, and ensure tests comply with law and contractual obligations. Documentation is part of the guardrail capture the plan, approval trail, safety checks, and rollback procedures before a single probe runs, so everyone understands intent and liability. Reporting protocols specify how findings are shared, who receives immediate alerts for critical vulnerabilities, and how communications to stakeholders are handled to prevent panic. By codifying engagement rules, you turn creative adversarial work into a disciplined exercise that yields verifiable improvements rather than untraceable disruption, and you protect your organization from the ethical and legal risks of unchecked probing. Handling data during red team tests requires deliberate caution, because realistic inputs make attacks believable, but also risk harming real people or exposing confidential information if mismanaged. Use anonymized or synthetically generated datasets wherever possible, and when realistic production-like samples are essential, strip identifiers and segment tests away from live pipelines. Keep testbeds isolated. Network segmentation, separate credentials, and dedicated telemetry channels prevent accidental bleed into production. Logging should be comprehensive for forensics, but also privacy-aware capture prompts, responses, and system state in tamper evidence stores while redacting or hashing personally identifiable fields. Establish retention and destruction policies for test artifacts so sensitive traces do not persist beyond the project's lifespan. Finally, train everyone involved on data handling rules. Complacency or ad hoc copying of results into emails or shared drives is a common path to leaks. Thoughtful data controls let you simulate high-risk scenarios realistically while keeping people and customers safe. Assessing outputs from red team campaigns means moving beyond "did it fail" to a layered rubric that judges exploit effectiveness, stealth, and potential impact. Effectiveness addresses whether an attack achieved its goal. Did a prompt bypass a safety filter, retrieve confidential items, or execute a dangerous action? Stealth considers time to detection and noise to signal ratio. Attacks that blend into normal traffic are more concerning than noisy one-off failures. Safety filter evasion measures whether system guardrails were circumvented and whether subsequent layers would have caught the behavior. Leakage metrics quantify the type and sensitivity of any revealed data. Evaluate generation of harmful content not only by whether it appeared, but by the downstream harm it could cause: public misinformation, privacy violation, or enabling illicit operations. Use concrete case examples. An injection that reveals a token is severe. An evasive phrasing that causes a minor policy flag is less so. This assessment approach helps prioritize fixes and drives clear remediation guidance tied to measurable harms. Metrics make red teaming actionable by converting creative experiments into comparable, repeatable measurements your organization can track over time. A central set of metrics should include attack success rate, the fraction of attempts that achieve a defined goal measured across attack classes, access levels, and query budgets. Coverage metrics reflect the portion of the surface exercised, which prompt templates, connectors, or ingestion paths were tested. Severity scoring weights, successes by potential impact data leaked, actions performed, or business-critical functions affected. So resources focus on high-consequence fixes. Time to detection captures defense responsiveness, while mean time to mitigation measures how quickly fixes or mitigations are deployed and verified. Also measure false positive rates in blue team detections to balance sensitivity and analyst load. Use dashboards that slice these metrics by model version, deployment region, and tenant, so progress is visible and accountable. Good metrics turn red team creativity into prioritized engineering work with measurable security returns. Red teams are most effective when tightly integrated with blue teams. Adversary simulation without response practice leaves detection and mitigation immature. Joint analysis sessions translate red team findings into concrete signal features. Blue teams can detect token patterns, temporal query shapes, or multi-step action chains, and incorporate those signals into detection models and rule sets. Train detection systems using red team artifacts as labeled positive examples, and tune thresholds to optimize detection coverage while controlling analyst burden. Establish a continuous improvement loop. Red tests produce telemetry, blue teams instrument and tune, defenders measure improved detection coverage, and red teams vary tactics to probe new gaps. Also run coordinated exercises where blue teams do not know some details of the test to approximate real-world surprise, then debrief collaboratively to refine playbooks. This collaborative posture shifts red teaming from adversarial theater to an organizational muscle that strengthens defenses systematically and pragmatically. Reporting and remediation close the loop by turning discoveries into prioritized fixes with verification and governance oversight. Deliver structured vulnerability reports that include an executive summary, reproduction steps, affected assets, severity classification, and recommended mitigations with estimated effort. Prioritize remediation by impact and exploitability. A high-severity, easy-to-exploit chain gets immediate attention and a rollback or mitigation plan, while low-severity items enter backlog grooming. Actionable recommendations should be specific. Patch this input sanitizer, add this rule to the validator chain, or scope the connector's permissions, and owners must be assigned with deadlines and acceptance criteria. Retest afterfixes to verify resistance, and maintain a remediation tracking system that links findings to pull requests, tickets, and test outcomes. Finally, feed lessons learned into training, CI gates, and policy updates so the organization reduces recurrence. When reporting becomes routine, red team output shifts from alarming anecdotes to a disciplined program that measurably improves resilience. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. A mature tooling ecosystem turns red team creativity into repeatable engineering practice, and selecting the right instruments matters more than novelty. Start with adversarial testing libraries that let you encode prompt templates, mutation strategies, and scoring functions as code, so experiments are reproducible and parameterizable. Automated prompt injectors and fuzzing frameworks generate broad coverage of input encodings, special characters, and rare token combinations that often reveal parser and tokenizer blind spots. Integrate monitoring dashboards that correlate red team activity with detector telemetry and business metrics, so findings translate into defensive signal engineering rather than isolated anecdotes. Tooling should also fit your development flows. Hooks into CI/CD let red tests run at merge time, while scalable runners execute heavier suites nightly. Evaluate tools for extensibility. Can you add domain-specific payloads? Observability. Do they emit structured telemetry? And safety. Do they sandbox side effects? When your red team toolkit is code-first, repeatable, and integrated, adversarial experiments become a steady source of prioritized, verifiable improvements, rather than sporadic reports that vanish into backlog limbo. Continuous red teaming treats adversarial testing as an ongoing exercise rather than a one-off audit, and that shift changes how organizations plan, budget, and learn. Instead of a single penetration test that finds issues and moves on, you run rolling assessment cycles, weekly prompt suites, monthly ingestion poison trials, quarterly extraction campaigns that adapt as both your models and the threat landscape evolve. Automation matters. Generate candidate attacks from recent telemetry, schedule them across staging mirrors, and feed results into a ticketing system that assigns remediation owners automatically. Continuous practice also reduces surprise. Defenders get used to novel strategies being tested and can iterate detection rules without panic. Crucially, embed red team output into your improvement loop. Use findings to tune validators, adjust policies, and enrich training data, so each campaign measurably raises resilience. Embrace continuous red teaming as a maintenance task. The adversary never stops probing, and neither should your defenses if you intend to stay ahead. Aligning red team findings with enterprise risk frameworks makes the exercise actionable at scale and ties technical discovery to governance priorities that matter to leadership. Map each vulnerability to a control domain: data protection, availability, integrity, or compliance, and translate technical severity into business impact metrics like potential financial loss, regulatory exposure, or customer churn. Track findings in the same risk register your GRC teams use, so remediation becomes a tracked control improvement rather than an isolated engineering chore. Produce summarized risk dashboards for board-level readers that show trends, attack success rates over time, time to remediate critical paths, and residual risk after mitigations. This translation also helps prioritize fixes. A medium-severity model hallucination affecting a non-core feature may wait, while a low-likelihood but high-impact extraction vector that exposes customer data demands immediate action. By speaking the language of risk, red teams ensure their most important lessons are funded and enforced, not politely archived. Scaling a red team program across an enterprise requires balancing centralized standards with distributed execution, and avoiding both duplication and blind spots. Centralize core capabilities tooling, test harnesses, risk taxonomies, and reporting templates, so teams use shared artifacts and findings are comparable across product lines. Decentralize execution so product teams can run targeted campaigns against their features with local domain expertise. Equip them with paved road libraries, playbooks, and guardrails to prevent unsafe experiments. Automate generation and distribution of test suites that cover common vectors, while enabling domain-specific modules for finance, healthcare, or operations workflows. Cloud-native integrations simplify scaling. Containerized runners, serverless orchestrators, and ephemeral test beds let you run heavy campaigns without bogging down development environments. Finally, Formalize an intake and prioritization mechanism so red tests across dozens of teams funnel into a single remediation pipeline, ensuring that scarce engineering focus hits the most business-critical faults first. Resource considerations drive pragmatic trade-offs in program scope and cadence, because high-quality red teaming is neither free nor instantly scalable. Specialized expertise threat modelers, prompt engineers, and ML-savvy security analysts commands premium salaries, and retaining that talent may be more cost-effective than one-off consultancies, depending on your appetite for continuous testing. Tool investment buys speed automated injectors, scalable sandboxes, and telemetry pipelines. Yet operational costs for compute and isolated environments accumulate for large models and heavy extraction tests. Balance this by prioritizing assets by risk, concentrate expert-led campaigns on crown jewel models, and automate routine hygiene checks for lower-impact systems. Consider hybrid approaches. Outsource periodic deep adversarial audits to external specialists while building an internal team for continuous, repeatable red tests. Track return on investment by measuring how many high-severity findings are closed per cycle and how much detection coverage improves, so funding decisions are grounded in evidence, not intuition. No matter how rigorous, red teaming has fundamental limits you must accept and design around. A red team can demonstrate vulnerabilities but cannot prove absolute security. Absence of findings is not evidence of invulnerability, only of coverage up to the team's creativity and the chosen test surface. Findings depend on the attackers, assumptions, and the testers. Ingenuity novel adversaries may invent exploits your red team never simulated. So continuous updates and diversity of approaches are essential. Red teaming also consumes time and resources, and it risks producing false confidence if results are not integrated into a hardening lifecycle that includes monitoring, patching, and validation. Finally, some aspects are inherently probabilistic transferability of attacks across model versions, the economic calculus of whether attackers will invest in extraction, and so require a risk management posture rather than a binary fixed-not-fixed mindset. Treat red teaming as indispensable but not omnipotent. It exposes blind spots, informs defenses, and should be one of several pillars, alongside architecture, governance, and detection, supporting your generative AI security program. Strategic importance of red teaming for generative AI cannot be overstated. It converts abstract risk into prioritized, remediable work that materially reduces likely harm and strengthens organizational confidence. When you run adversarial campaigns that mimic real-world attackers, you gain empirical evidence about where defenses fail, not just theoretical lists of vulnerabilities. That evidence is what executives, auditors, and partners demand: concrete metrics about attack success rates, detection latency, and remediation time that translate technical effort into business risk reduction. Red teaming also accelerates product maturity by surfacing brittle assumptions in workflows and prompting timely improvements to validators, monitoring, and governance. In markets where trust is scarce, being able to say "we test continually, we measure, and we fix" becomes a market differentiator. Customers and regulators prefer vendors who prove they have actively hunted for problems and closed the most dangerous ones. Begin with a pragmatic implementation roadmap that balances ambition with safety and learnability. Start small. Pick one high-value application or model. Define clear objectives and measurable acceptance criteria, and stand up an isolated testbed that mirrors production topology. Create repeatable, parameterizable test suites, curated prompts, fuzzing templates, and ingestion poison scenarios that can run in CI so you catch regressions early. Prioritize remediation paths for findings, classify issues into quick wins, engineering projects, and governance changes, and assign owners with clear SLAs. Invest in telemetry and automation early so detection and mitigation are not manual chores, but programmatic flows that enqueue fixes and rerun tests. Over time, expand scope methodically, more models, connectors, and tenants, rather than trying to scan everything at once. A phased approach turns red teaming into a reliable component of your delivery pipeline rather than an occasional audit. Organizational change is essential. Red teaming must live at the intersection of product, security, and research, with a governance mechanism that ensures findings translate into funded work. Create formal handoffs. A red team discovers and documents, a blue team tunes detection and monitoring, engineering implements fixes, and a governance body validates remediation and signs off on risk acceptance. Train product and engineering managers to interpret red team metrics so prioritization reflects business impact, not only technical curiosity. Budget for sustained capability tools, isolated test beds, and retained expertise, rather than one-time engagements, because creativity and continuity amplify defensive returns. Incentivize teams for measurable improvements in resilience metrics and create feedback paths so remediations feed training data, CI tests, and documentation. Cultural alignment matters. When security is seen as an enabler of safe product expansion rather than an obstacle, teams adopt defensive practices voluntarily. Long-term maintenance keeps red teaming effective as models and adversaries evolve. Maintain rolling red team cycles that revisit each major asset at a cadence informed by exposure and change frequency monthly for high-risk interfaces, quarterly for core models, yearly for long-lived backends. Update threat models when new features, connectors, or datasets ship, and rotate tester composition to prevent creativity atrophy. Outside contractors or rotating cross-team members blast new patterns into your defenses. Continuously refresh tooling fuzzers, prompt libraries, and environment mirrors so tests exercise current code paths and tokenizers. Ensure remediation verification is automated. A fix that resists the original exploit but fails under a slightly modified prompt is a brittle patch, not durable security. Finally, institutionalize learning. Keep playbooks, red team discoveries, and remediations in a searchable knowledge base so future teams can build on institutional memory instead of rediscovering the same blind spots. Measuring return on investment and communicating impact to leadership require translating red team outputs into risk-based narratives you can defend. Tie findings to business-postured metrics, potential customer data exposure, estimated compliance fines avoided, or the time and cost of incident response averted by earlier detection. Use severity-weighted dashboards that show trending attack success rates, remediation velocity, and residual risk per product line. Demonstrate wins, closed high-severity findings, reduced mean time to detect, and improved coverage of detection rules show progress that justifies ongoing investment. Frame red teaming as part of the company's trust program evidence that you proactively hunt for and fix issues, so procurement and legal teams see it as a value add in contract negotiations. When you can show dollars or reputational risk mitigated per cycle, sustained funding becomes a strategic decision rather than a contested budget item. Red teaming raises the organization's readiness to face adversaries and prepares you for rigorous evaluation and test pipelines that validate system hardening over time. It exposes brittle assumptions, prioritizes defenses, and integrates with blue team workflows so detection and mitigation improve in lockstep. But it also demands discipline, careful scope, safe environments, repeatable tooling, and governance that closes the loop from discovery to verified remediation. You should now be ready to translate red team designs into continuous evaluation systems, automated pipelines that run targeted adversarial suites at merge time, maintain test beds that replay attacks against new model checkpoints, and feed validated artifacts back into training and policy tuning. The next topic will examine exactly how to build those evaluation and testing pipelines so hardening becomes a measurable, automated part of your development lifecycle rather than an occasional heroics-driven effort. Thanks for tuning in to Bare Metal Cyber, your trusted source for cybersecurity educational materials, news, and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.